My brother-in-law's truck was parked in my parents' driveway. That's the first thing I saw when I turned onto their street, and something in my stomach dropped before I even had a reason to let it. I told myself it was fine. People stop by, families visit. Maybe he and my sister were just dropping something off. Maybe my mom had called them. Maybe I was reading into a Ford pickup the way I read into everything when it comes to that side of the family. I kept driving. I parked behind the truck. I sat there for a second with my hand still on the wheel. Then I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, the one I'd brought from the attorney's office 2 days before, the one I almost left in my car a dozen times because I kept thinking I wouldn't need it, and I went inside. My parents have been married for 38 years. My dad is the kind of man who fixes things without being asked and never talks about it afterward. My mom makes coffee at 5:30 in the morning, even on days she has nowhere to be, just because she likes the ritual of it. They are not dramatic people. They do not ask for much. For most of my adult life, that's been the thing I loved most about them and the thing that scared me most too. Because people who don't ask for much are easy to take advantage of. My sister married her husband 8 years ago. I was a bridesmaid. I wore a dress the color of sage and smiled in every photo. I wanted to like him. I really did. He has this way of being charming in public and quietly corrosive in private, and it took me a few years to understand that those were not two separate sides of him. That was just who he was, and the charm was the part he showed when there was something to gain. I noticed small things over time. The way he always seemed to know what things cost. The way he talked about my parents' house, not as a home, but as a property. The way he'd say things like, your folks are getting up there, in a tone that was supposed to sound caring, but always landed somewhere closer to assessment. My sister isn't cruel. I want to be clear about that. She loves my parents in her way, but she's been with him long enough that some of his thinking has become her thinking, and I've watched that happen slowly, the way a tide moves, until one day you look up and the shoreline is completely different. The idea started the way most things do, was a problem I couldn't stop thinking about. My parents have rented the same house for 11 years. The landlord is fine. The neighborhood is fine. But the lease goes up every 2 years, and every time it does, there's a few weeks where my dad doesn't sleep well and my mom pretends not to notice. They've never said anything to me directly. They wouldn't, but I notice. I'm a software engineer. I've been working since I was 22, living below my means, putting money away. I don't say that to brag. I say it because it matters to what comes next. I had savings, real savings, not I might buy a car savings. The kind that took years and a lot of saying no to things I wanted. About 14 months ago, I started looking at properties. Not for me, for them. I found a house in a smaller city about 40 minutes from where I live. A 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street with a covered porch and a yard big enough for my dad's vegetable garden and a neighborhood with good walkability and low crime. The kind of place they would never find for themselves because they would never look. Because looking would feel like asking for something they didn't think they deserved. I paid $267,000 for it. Cash, because I'd saved enough and because a cash offer meant a faster close and fewer complications. I spent another $30,000 on repairs and updates before they ever set foot in it. New roof, updated kitchen, better insulation, a wheelchair-accessible bathroom on the ground floor because my dad's knees aren't what they used to be and I was thinking ahead. I had an estate planning attorney set up a revocable living trust. My parents are the primary beneficiaries. The house is held in the trust. I'm the trustee, which means I control what happens to it. My parents have the legal right to live there for the rest of their lives. They cannot be removed. They cannot be pressured into selling. And when they pass, the property transfers to me, not to the estate, not through probate, not through any process that would give anyone else a foothold. I also set up an escrow account with 5 years of property taxes and insurance premiums pre-funded. because I didn't want them to ever have to worry about a bill showing up and not knowing how to handle it. I told them I was taking them out to dinner for their anniversary. That's all I said. We drove out on a Saturday afternoon in late March. My mom kept asking where we were going, and I kept saying it was a surprise, and she kept saying she hated surprises, and we both knew she was lying. My dad fell asleep in the back seat for 20 minutes, woke up when we pulled off the highway, looked out the window, and said, "This is pretty out here." He doesn't say things like that usually. He's not a man of aesthetic observations, so I held on to it. We pulled up to the house. I'd had someone put flowers in the window boxes, yellow ones because my mom's favorite color is yellow and she'd never told me that, but I'd been watching her for 30 years and I knew. There was a wreath on the door. The porch light was on even though it was still afternoon. My mom saw it first and she didn't say anything. She put her hand on the car door and just looked. "Whose house is this?" she said. "Yours," I said. She turned around and looked at me, and I watched her face do something I've never seen it do before. Not cry exactly, more like break open a little. Like something she'd been holding for a long time just suddenly didn't need to be held anymore. My dad took longer. He walked up to the porch slowly, ran his hand along the railing, looked out at the yard. He went inside and walked through every room without saying anything. I followed a few steps behind. He stopped in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the garden window above the sink. "There's space for a raised bed out back," I told him. "The soil is good." He nodded. He still didn't say anything. And then he turned around and hugged me in the way he never hugs me. Not the quick side pat, but actually held on. And I understood that he understood. We ate takeout on the living room floor that night because there was no furniture yet. My mom kept walking from room to room like she was making sure it was still there. My dad found an outlet that needed a cover plate and fixed it before we even left. That was 4 months ago. I got a call from my mom on a Tuesday morning. I almost didn't pick up because I was in a meeting, but something made me step out. She sounded careful. That's the word. Not upset, not panicked. Careful. Like she was choosing each word before she let it out. She said my sister and her husband had stopped by. She said her husband had been asking questions about the house, about who owned it, about whether there was a mortgage, about what would happen to it. I asked her what she told him. She said she told him it was taken care of. I asked if he seemed satisfied with that. She paused for a second. "He mentioned he could help manage things," she said. "If it ever became complicated." I knew what that meant. I knew what help manage things meant from a man who once spent 45 minutes explaining to my father why he should move his retirement savings into a fund he happened to have a connection to. I knew what complicated meant from someone who would make things complicated if they weren't already. I told my mom I would come out that weekend. I did not tell her what I was bringing. I got to the house at 11 on Saturday morning. My sister's car was parked along the curb. I hadn't known she'd be there. My mom hadn't mentioned it, and for a second I just sat in my car looking at it, recalibrating. Then I picked up my bag and went inside. My brother-in-law was in the living room. He'd moved the furniture, not dramatically, but enough. The chairs were angled differently. He was sitting in my dad's chair by the window, the one my dad had picked out specifically because of how the morning light came through. He had his phone in his hand and he was scrolling when I walked in, and he looked up with this expression that was friendly on the surface and something else underneath. "Hey," he said, "didn't know you were coming." "Same," I said. My mom was in the kitchen. My sister was sitting at the table. My dad was standing near the back door with his coffee mug, and when I came in, he looked at me in a way that I understood immediately. Not distress exactly, more like the look of a man who has been politely enduring something and is quietly relieved that the enduring part might be over. My brother-in-law didn't wait long. He had the manner of someone who had practiced what he was going to say and was eager to get to the part where he said it. He told me he'd been thinking, He said the house was a significant asset. He said my parents were getting older. He said it just like that, right in front of them, like they weren't sitting there, and that it made sense for the family to have a unified plan for how the property would be handled going forward. He used the word family the way people use it when they mean themselves. He said he had a contact at a property management company. He said the house could be generating rental income. He said there were tax advantages to consider and that he'd done some research and really thought it was worth a conversation. My sister nodded along. She has this thing she does when she's not sure how she feels about something. She just agrees with whoever's talking. It's not malicious. It's just how she's learned to be in that marriage. My dad hadn't moved from the back door. My mom had stopped making sound in the kitchen. I set my bag down on the table. I appreciate you thinking about it, I said. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about a few things. He smiled. The charming one, of course. I took out the folder. The trust document is 43 pages. I didn't make him read all of it. I just showed him the relevant parts. The property is held in a revocable living trust. My name is the trustee. My parents are the beneficiaries with a lifetime right of residency, meaning they live there for as long as they are alive, full stop. The property cannot be sold, rented, refinanced, or transferred without my authorization as trustee. Not by my parents. Not by anyone acting on their behalf. Not by anyone acting on their behalf. Not by a family member claiming to have their best interests in mind. I also showed him the escrow documentation, 5 years of taxes and insurance already funded, with automatic renewal provisions in place. And then I showed him the clause that I'd asked my attorney to include specifically, the one about what happens if anyone attempts to exert undue influence over the beneficiaries regarding the property. It's not boilerplate, I'd asked for it by name. My attorney had raised an eyebrow and said, "You expecting trouble?" And I'd said I was expecting to prevent it. My brother-in-law read in silence. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It dimmed, slowly, like a light on a dimmer switch being turned down. "So you're the trustee," he said. "Yes. Indefinitely. Until I choose to modify the trust, which I don't plan to do." He looked at my sister. She was looking at the table. "I was just trying to help," he said, and his voice had shifted into something quieter, a little aggrieved. The voice of a man recasting himself as the misunderstood one before anyone else could define the scene. "I know," I said, "and now you know it's handled." There's a silence that happens in rooms when something has been settled. Not a comfortable silence, more like the absence of something that was taking up space. That's what happened then. My brother-in-law picked up his phone. He said something to my sister about needing to get back. She stood up and hugged me, a real hug, briefer than usual but genuine, and I held on for a second because she's still my sister. And whatever she's absorbed from that marriage, she was also the person who used to share a bedroom with me and knows every embarrassing thing I've ever done and kept all of it. They left. My dad came in from the back door. He set his coffee mug on the counter. He looked at me for a moment and then he said, "You didn't have to do all that." "I know," I said. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Then he said, "I was thinking about the raised bed. I want to do 3 sections. Tomatoes, peppers, and something your mother picks." "That's a good plan," I said. My mom came out of the kitchen. She didn't make a big thing of what had just happened. She's not that kind of woman. She just refilled my coffee without asking and sat down next to me and put her hand on mine for a second and then went back to whatever she'd been doing. That was it. That was the whole thing. I stayed for dinner. My dad made something on the grill and we ate on the back porch while the sun went down and the neighborhood got quiet. The street is the kind where kids ride bikes in the early evening and dogs are walked on leashes and people wave at each other from driveways. My parents fit into it already. My mom knows the neighbor's name. My dad has already identified a cramped section of sidewalk that he wants to report to the city. I've thought a lot since then about what I would say if someone asked me why I did it the way I did. The trust, the escrow, the attorney, all of it. Because it probably looks like I was expecting a fight. Like, I was prepared for something I didn't tell my parents I was preparing for. And that's true. I was. I've watched my brother in law long enough to know how he thinks. I knew that a house with no mortgage and elderly owners and a title that could theoretically be influenced would look to him like an opportunity. I knew that he would frame it as help, and I knew that my parents, who trust people by default and don't think in terms of legal exposure, might not immediately see the difference. So I closed every door before he could find them. Some people would say that's not trusting your family, that you shouldn't have to do that, that it's sad that things are this way. Maybe, but I've also watched my parents sleep better in that house than they have in years. I've watched my dad spend entire weekend mornings in the backyard planting a garden he has no reason to worry about losing. I've watched my mom put things on the walls and not take them down. Pictures, a mirror she found at an estate sale, a little ceramic hook by the front door for her keys. Because for the first time in 11 years, she doesn't have to imagine moving. That's what I was protecting. Not a property, not an asset. The right of two people who spent 38 years building something quiet and decent to be left alone to live in it. My brother-in-law has not come back since that Saturday. My sister calls occasionally and we talk about other things. I don't know what she thinks. I don't know what she said to him about it or what he said to her. We haven't talked about it directly and I'm not sure we will. What I know is that my dad built the first raised bed section 3 weeks ago. He sent me a photo, 3 rows of tomato seedlings in a straight line, because he's the kind of man who plants in straight lines. He didn't say anything in the message, just the photo and then one sentence underneath it. Room for more if you ever want to grow something too. I'm thinking about taking him up on that. I keep thinking about my dad's hands on that porch railing, the way he ran them along the wood slowly, like he was checking if it was real. He's not a man who shows much. He spent most of my childhood fixing things in silence, showing up without being asked, never making a production of any of it. And I think for a long time I mistook that quietness for not needing things. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that some people go without not because they don't want, but because they've never believed wanting was something they were allowed to do. That's what my brother-in-law didn't account for. He looked at that house and saw a number, an asset, an opportunity to position himself as useful. What he couldn't see, what I'm not sure he has the capacity to see, is that the house was never about the money. The money was just the mechanism. What I was actually trying to give my parents was the feeling of standing somewhere and knowing it couldn't be taken. What happened that Saturday wasn't really about legal documents. The trust, the escrow, the attorney. Those were just the form that preparation took. The real thing underneath all of it was a choice I made quietly over years to pay attention, to plan, and to act before the problem became a crisis. That's not dramatic. It doesn't make for a good story in the moment. But I think most of the things that actually protect the people you love happen exactly that way, without an audience, without applause. In the middle of an ordinary Tuesday when you're sitting across from an estate planning attorney trying to think 3 steps ahead of someone you haven't confronted yet. My sister is not a villain. I want to be clear about that, even now. She is someone who made a choice about who to build her life with, and over time, that choice shaped how she sees things. I don't know how to fix that. I'm not sure it's mine to fix. But I do know that doing right by my parents didn't require me to wait for her to get there. Sometimes integrity means moving forward without consensus. There's a version of me that might have waited, that would have told herself it wasn't her place, that maybe she was overreacting, that families work these things out. I was that version of myself for a while. What changed wasn't some dramatic moment. It was just the accumulation of small observations over years, and eventually the understanding that insight without action is just anxiety with better vocabulary. My dad sent me a photo last week. The tomatoes are coming in. 3 rows, perfectly straight, the way he does everything. He didn't write much, just the picture and a note that said there was room for more if I wanted to grow something too. I think about that a lot. The idea that protection and care and building something that lasts, those aren't things you do instead of living. They are the living. They're the rows you plant knowing you might not see every harvest, trusting that the work itself was worth doing. I'm going out next weekend with a flat of basil and some climbing beans. I'll put them in the ground next to his tomatoes, and we probably won't talk much about any of this. We'll just be 2 people in a yard, doing something ordinary together in a place that's finally, permanently theirs. That's enough. That's more than enough.